policy bill, Mr Chair.
The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to speak to the issue that's been raised or emphasised today by the New Zealand Law Society. Sir, nowhere in the version of the bill that went to Select Committee and that people submitted on was there a reference to people being able to be tried in respect of offences where they could be convicted on the basis of evidence they didn't hear and evidence that their lawyer could not see either. Mr Speaker, those provisions were inserted at Select Committee after submissions had closed, and they weren't even referred to by the Select Committee when they were drawing attention to this House of the amendments that were being made to the legislation. The supplementary order paper then makes further amendments to those provisions, and I want to describe, sir, if I have time, what the Law Society is saying about them, because they say that these...
No, I'm afraid these haven't been discussed in the committee stages, and what we're talking about now, if we looked at 127.5 Speaker's rulings, we're on the title and commencement. One needs to tie that back. There is some latitude, however, to summarise those things that have been discussed during the course of the committee stage. This is new material you're bringing up about that hasn't been discussed by this committee. So,
thank you, Mr Speaker. Point of order.
David Parker.
Point of order, sir. This was raised in the debate on Part 4 by Jacinda Ardern.
I will listen very carefully. The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Health and Safety Reform Bill doesn't in its title say that it's taking away the right to a fair trial. Sir, that is, according to the Law Society, the effect of these provisions, and they recommend removal of the provisions to await the outcome of an inquiry by the Law Commission in respect of national security information. They say the effect of the provisions are very broad because they apply including to investigations by the police, not just by security agencies, and that the definition of classified security information is very broad. Mr Speaker, they make the point that none of this was subject to a Bill of Rights vet because it was introduced late in the process at Select Committee, and neither were the...
I'm sorry, the letter that you're referring to was not part of the Select Committee's consideration, nor has it been, or the Committee of the Whole I'm referring to. And so I'm listening very carefully to what the Honourable Member is saying, and I ask you to tie it back into the commencement and title. That's what we're on, and the peroration, which is a summing up of those things that have been discussed within the Committee of the Whole. Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do note the Minister trying to influence the Chair.
Oh no.
Mr Speaker.
No.
Mr Speaker.
Member will sit. You withdraw that comment. There's no influence whatsoever by any member of this House on the Chair. This is impartial material, and I get my advice from the clerk. All right, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Law Society makes the point that the commencement of this ought to be delayed, and this is, sir, within the date of, there is a variety of commencement dates provided for, as Andrew Little has already addressed in this debate. The Law Society is saying that these provisions ought not to come into effect until the Law Commission has reported back. Mr Speaker, it is most unusual that we would in this Parliament pass legislation that took away the right of an accused to hear the evidence that was being used against the accused, and most rare for the court not to be able to challenge the validity of doing that. And that's what the Law Society say is happening here. So I want to turn to another point. Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, the exclusion of farms essentially from the ambit of organisations that need to have worker representatives is part of a continuing trend by this government exempting the farming sector. We saw it in respect of emissions pricing. 50% of New Zealand's emissions come from...
Order.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think it is with a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order. Honourable David Parker.
With respect, sir, it must be in order for me, when the government is excluding the farming sector, to point
We're
out
not talking about emissions, and that was not part of the debate. You've got 5 seconds remaining. Honourable David Parker.
I'm not going to bother.